March 15th, 1885, Greystone Island. Father gifted me this leather-bound journal today, though gift might be too generous a word. He merely handed it to me with his usual gruff manner, muttering something about keeping proper records now that I've turned 18. The Lighthouse log is his domain, all business with weather patterns, ship sightings, and mechanical maintenance. This book, he said, is for my womanly observations. I suspect it's his way of acknowledging my birthday without the discomfort of sentiment. The leather cover is worn but sturdy, like everything else on Greystone. I shall do my best to fill these pages with more than just womanly observations. This small island deserves a proper chronicler, and who better than the girl who has known nothing else? March 17th, 1885. The northeaster that threatened yesterday has passed us by, veering eastward during the night. I rose before dawn to help Father clean the lantern room glass. The great Fresnel lens must be spotless. Lives depend on our light. My hands are raw from the vinegar solution we use, but I don't mind. There is something satisfying about ensuring that perfect beam cuts through the darkness, reaching out 20 miles to sea. Father says I polish the brass fixtures better than he ever could. It's as close to praise as he offers these days. March 20th, 1885. 3 ships passed on the horizon today, all heading north toward Portland. I watched them through Father's spyglass. They were tiny specks of civilization that remind me there's a world beyond our rocks and waves. Father noted them dutifully in the Lighthouse log, but I wonder about the people aboard. Do they look toward our light and wonder about us? Or is our beacon simply another navigation point, our existence no more remarkable to them than a buoy or a channel marker? 7 years since another human foot has stepped on Greystone. The supply boat comes quarterly, but Mr. Harrison never disembarks. He just hands over our provisions and the occasional mail pouch, accepts Father's reports, and returns to the mainland. I'm beginning to forget what other voices sound like. March 23rd, 1885. The clock in the kitchen stopped again last night, though Father had wound it just yesterday. When I mentioned it this morning, his face darkened as it always does when strange occurrences happen. He reset it without comment, but I noticed his hands trembling. It's the 3rd time this month something like this has happened. Last week, my pocket watch ran backward for nearly an hour before correcting itself. Father forbids discussion of these oddities. They are just the maritime air affecting the mechanisms, he always says. But his eyes tell a different story. There's fear there, and perhaps something else, something like guilt. March 30th, 1885. A curious thing happened today. I was hanging laundry on the lines behind the cottage when I saw a fishing trawler rounding the northern point. I noted its distinctive red sail and the name painted on its hull, the Merry Widow. 3 hours later, as I was collecting the dried sheets, the exact same vessel, unmistakably the Merry Widow with its red sail, rounded the same point again, moving at the same speed and angle. When I told Father at supper, his spoon clattered against his bowl. He instructed me to record only what can be logically explained in the Lighthouse log. "The sea plays tricks on the eyes," he said. But I know what I saw. Just as I know sometimes the tide comes in twice in the same hour, or how occasionally the sunset lingers, stretching minutes into what feels like hours. I've begun to wonder if time moves differently around Greystone. Perhaps that's why Father keeps so rigidly to his schedules and logbooks. He is trying to impose order on something that defies it. April 5th, 1885. Spring arrives reluctantly on Greystone. The wind still carries winter's bite, but I found sea lavender blooming in the sheltered cove this morning. I've pressed some between these pages. The small purple blooms are the only color in our gray world of stone, sea, and sky. Father climbed the 103 steps to the lantern room 4 times today, checking and rechecking the mechanism. I can see that his joints pain him more with each passing season, though he'd never admit it. I've learned to ascend silently behind him, staying far enough back that his pride remains intact, close enough to catch him should he stumble. He's all I have, this solemn man with eyes the color of a stormy sea. Some days I catch glimpses of who he might have been before grief hollowed him out. When his voice softens as he teaches me about celestial navigation, or when I catch him watching me with an expression almost like wonder. Does he see my mother in me? He never speaks of her, and I've learned not to ask. My birth took her life. This much I've gathered from the sparse details he's let slip over the years. Sometimes I feel her absence like a phantom limb, aching for something I've never known. April 12th, 1885. I repainted the kitchen today. The salt air peels the paint relentlessly, another endless task in our cycle of maintenance. As I worked, I sang to myself, mostly old folk songs, the ones Mrs. Harrison taught me during the years she stayed with us after Mother died. My voice echoed strangely in the empty room, sometimes seeming to come back to me seconds after I'd stopped a phrase, as if the house itself were singing back. Father was up in the tower, so I allowed myself the small pleasure of dancing with my paintbrush, swirling around the kitchen and pretending I was at a grand ball. I've read about such gatherings in the tattered novels Mr. Harrison occasionally brings. I wonder how it feels to wear silk instead of rough cotton and to have dancing slippers instead of my sturdy boots. Not that I'm ungrateful, we have what we need here, but sometimes I yearn for something different in this hard, beautiful place. April 17th, 1885. Today is a perfect, calm day, rare for Greystone. The sea stretched like blue glass to the horizon. I rowed out past the southern reef and dove for abalone. The cold nearly stole my breath, but I've been swimming these waters since I could walk. Father doesn't approve of women swimming, especially not diving, but he's resigned himself to my peculiarities, as he calls them. Besides, the abalone makes a welcome change from our usual salted fish and preserves. As I dove deeper on my final attempt, something strange occurred. The quality of the light changed underwater. It brightened as if the sun had suddenly intensified. When I surfaced, breathless with my prize, the sun had moved westward in the sky as if an hour had passed in the span of minutes. My fingers had the wrinkled appearance of having been submerged far longer than I'd been under. I said nothing to Father about this time slippage when I returned. His mood has been darker lately. His attention fixed on the lighthouse mechanisms with an almost desperate intensity. What does he know, but won't tell me? April 25th, 1885. The supply boat came early. Mr. Harrison seemed unsettled by this fact, insisting his schedule had him arriving tomorrow. Father became agitated, checking and rechecking the calendar in the logbook. I distracted Mr. Harrison with questions about the mainland while Father composed himself. Among our supplies were seeds for the kitchen garden and 2 new books, a treatise on modern lighthouse techniques, and, wonderfully, a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Mr. Harrison winked as he handed me the latter, wrapped discreetly in brown paper. "For the lady of the house," he said. "The first time anyone has referred to me as such." The poetry book has become my secret treasure. I read it by lantern light after Father retires, marveling at how this woman I'll never meet has captured feelings I've never been able to name. There's one about the sea that makes my heart ache with recognition. I started early. Took my dog and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me. How did she know the sea holds secrets in its depths? Has she too seen time bend and twist like seaweed in the current? May 2nd, 1885. The barometer has been falling steadily for 2 days. Father's mood falls with it. He's been checking the emergency supplies and securing everything that might be torn loose in high winds. I've filled every available container with fresh water and brought in extra firewood. The air has that strange stillness that precedes a major storm. It is thick and electric. Even the seabirds have gone quiet, no longer wheeling and crying around our cliffs. They've sought shelter inland, their animal instincts more reliable than our instruments. Tonight, as I trimmed the lantern wicks, I felt a cold certainty settle in my bones. This storm will change something fundamental in our ordered existence. Father must sense it too. He checked the great light 3 times before retiring, his face drawn with worry. I shall keep this journal close during the coming gale. If nothing else, perhaps these words will remain as testimony that we did our duty here, whatever comes. May 3rd, 1885. The storm arrived with nightfall, more ferocious than any I can remember. The wind screams around the tower like a living thing, seeking entrance at every seam and crack. Waves crash against our rock, sending spray higher than the lantern room itself. The entire lighthouse shudders with each impact. Father and I take turns tending the light. The mechanism remains steady, though the darkness beyond our windows seems to devour its beam. We are an island of light in a maelstrom of chaos, our small flame defying the elements. During my watch, as I wiped condensation from the lantern room windows, I saw something that froze my blood. A ship's lights, pitching violently, much too close to our jagged shore. I rang the warning bell and called for Father. Together, we watched in horror as the vessel struggled against the tide, dragging it toward the reef. Father has gone to prepare our rescue boat, though how we'll launch in these rough seas I cannot imagine. I am to maintain the light while he attempts the impossible. My hands shake as I write this, stealing moments between tending the flame and watching that poor ship fight for survival. The vessel is larger than I first thought. It is a schooner by the arrangement of its lights. Only a complete navigation error could have brought it so close to our deadly shores on such a night. Unless a terrible thought occurs to me. What if the temporal strangeness of Greystone has affected the ship somehow? What if they're sailing in a different time than they believe, guided by stars and charts that don't match our reality? I must go now. Father calls from below. I've tucked my mother's locket inside this journal for safekeeping. Should fate turn against us tonight, perhaps someone will find these pages and understand what happened here on Greystone, this island out of time. If we survive until morning, I'll continue this account. If not, know that we did everything humanly possible to keep our light burning against the darkness. May 4th, 1885, Greystone Island. I write these words with hands still trembling, not from cold, though the sea tried its best to claim us, but from the night's impossible events. Father and I live, though by all rights we should not. The schooner is lost, broken against our merciless shore, but we managed to save one soul from the wreckage. Though Father insisted I stay inside where it was safe, I refused and helped him launch our rescue boat into seas that seemed determined to shatter it against the rocks. Father rowed with the strength of a man half his age, while I held the lantern high, its feeble light swallowed by the storm's fury. The waves tossed us like a child's toy, and I confess I prayed as I have never prayed before. Twice we nearly capsized, but Father's skill kept us afloat. When we reached the foundering vessel, it was already half submerged, its deck at a terrible angle. Most of the crew must have been swept away before we arrived. We called out, our voices thin against the wind's howl, and were about to turn back when I spotted a figure clinging to broken rigging. Father brought us alongside, and together we pulled the man into our boat, a feat that seems impossible now as I describe it. He was unconscious but breathing, blood streaming from a gash across his temple. The journey back nearly ended us all. A massive wave crashed over our stern, filling the boat halfway with water. I bailed frantically while Father rowed, the unconscious stranger lying between us. When we finally reached our landing, the boat shattered against the jetty steps. We dragged the man up the path to the cottage as lightning revealed the last of the schooner slipping beneath the waves. He lives, this stranger from the sea. Father carried him to my bed, as it was nearest the hearth. I have taken the small cot in the kitchen. He has not yet awakened, but his heart beats steadily. I have cleaned and bandaged his head wound and treated his other injuries, which consists of a broken wrist, 3 cracked ribs, and countless lacerations. Father says it is a miracle he survived at all. Tomorrow I will search the shore for any other survivors, though hope is slim. For now, I must rest. The storm still rages, but our light still turns, and we have done what good we could this awful night. May 5th, 1885. Dawn brought calmer seas and the true extent of the destruction. Father and I walked the entire shoreline, searching for survivors. We found only wreckage, splintered timbers, torn sails, a ship's bell inscribed Stella Maris, Boston, 1882. No other souls survived. The stranger remained unconscious through the morning, but as I bathed his fevered brow shortly after midday, his eyes opened. They are the most startling blue, the clear color of a perfect summer sky that Greystone so rarely sees. He seemed confused, unable to speak, before slipping back into unconsciousness. I have continued to administer willow bark tea for his fever, spooning small amounts between his lips. Among the items we salvaged from his pockets, a pocket watch, still functioning despite its immersion, but strangely showing a date of March 17, 1883, a leather wallet containing visiting cards identifying him as James Hartford of the Boston Maritime Historical Society, and a brass key unlike any I've ever seen, with strange teeth and markings. Father keeps his distance from our guest, watching from the doorway with undisguised suspicion. When I asked what troubled him, he muttered something about the timing of the shipwreck and the storm, as if the two were connected by more than mere misfortune. He has taken to checking the lighthouse mechanism hourly. May 7th, 1885. Mr. Hartford has regained consciousness properly today. His fever broke during the night, and I found him attempting to sit up when I brought breakfast. I was struck immediately by his refined manner of speaking. Each word was precisely chosen and delivered in a cultured accent I've only read about in novels. Though weak, he thanked me with such genuine gratitude that I felt my cheeks flush. He asked about his ship and crew, and I had to tell him the terrible truth. He received the news with remarkable composure, though sorrow shadowed his eyes. He said he remembers little of the wreck, only that they had been sailing in clear weather when suddenly they were enveloped in the worst storm he'd ever encountered. It came upon them with unnatural speed, he said, giving them no time to prepare. Throughout the day, as I tended his injuries, Mr. Hartford has revealed fragments of himself. He is indeed a scholar, specializing in maritime anomalies and navigational mysteries. His journey aboard the Stella Maris was part of his research into reports of strange occurrences along this stretch of coastline. When I changed his bandages this evening, I noticed a peculiar tattoo on his shoulder. A compass rose with symbols I don't recognize in place of cardinal directions. When he saw me looking, he said only that it was a reminder that not all who wander are lost. I wonder what he meant by that. Father still avoids our guest, making excuses to remain in the tower or work on the grounds. His behavior puzzles me. May 10th, 1885. 3 days of nursing Mr. Hartford. He has asked me to call him James, though I find myself hesitant to use such familiarity, have taught me much about the world beyond Greystone. As I rebandage his ribs or bring him meals, he tells me of Boston, with its cobblestone streets and grand libraries, of European cities with art and music beyond my imagination, and of scientific advancements that sound like magic. Today, he was strong enough to sit in the chair by the window. As I helped him cross the small room, I was acutely aware of my rough hands supporting his scholarly ones, of my homespun dress beside his fine, if salt-damaged, clothing. I've never before felt embarrassed by my practical appearance, but his presence makes me conscious of things I've never considered, such as the windburn on my cheeks, my hands calloused from lighthouse work, and my hair simply braided without artifice. Yet he looks at me with such interest when I speak, as if my observations about tide patterns or weather signs are as valuable as his university knowledge. No one has ever listened to me this way. The strange temporal anomalies continue around us. This afternoon, the kitchen clock chimed 3 o'clock 4 times in succession, while the shadow on our sundial jumped forward and back. James noticed, though I tried to distract him. Instead of disbelief, his eyes lit with what looked like confirmation of some private theory. May 12th, 1885. There was a troubling development. When I mentioned today's date while writing in the Lighthouse log, James looked genuinely confused. He insisted that it is 1883, not 1885. When I showed him Father's meticulous logbooks as proof, he became agitated, checking his pocket watch and muttering calculations. According to him, he set sail from Boston just 3 weeks ago, in April of 1883. I don't know what to make of this. Either the head injury has affected his memory, or something far stranger is happening. Given the time anomalies we've witnessed on Greystone, I cannot dismiss his claim entirely. Later, while James slept, I examined the contents of his salvaged sea chest that washed ashore this morning. Among his rain-damaged papers and books, I found something impossible: a scientific journal with a publication date of 1884, which would make it from his future if he truly is from 1883. Even more disturbing is a book on temporal physics published in 1887, 2 years into our future, even by my reckoning. I've hidden these items in my trunk before Father could see them. The implications terrify me. May 15th, 1885. James grows stronger daily. This morning, he insisted on accompanying me to the cliff top, leaning heavily on a driftwood walking stick I fashioned for him. Though the short walk left him winded, the joy on his face as he looked out over the ocean was worth the effort. As we stood watching the waves, he took my hand to steady himself. His touch sent a strange current through me. It wasn't unpleasant, but unsettling in its novelty. No man except Father has ever held my hand, and Father's calloused grip bears no resemblance to James's careful touch. I found myself noticing details I've never considered important, such as the shape of his profile against the sky, the way sunlight catches in his dark hair, and how his eyes crinkle at the corners when he smiles. These observations disturb me. He will leave when he heals and when transport to the mainland can be arranged. Attachment would be foolish. While we were outside, another temporal shift occurred. The sun seemed to stutter in the sky, jumping positions in an instant. James not only noticed, but seemed to be expecting it, checking his pocket watch and making notes in a small book. When I asked what he was recording, he hesitated before saying, "Evidence that I'm exactly where I need to be." May 18th, 1885. Father and I argued today. It was our first serious quarrel in years. He wants James gone and says his presence is aggravating the condition. When I asked what condition he meant, he grew evasive, then angry. He forbade me from discussing the time anomalies with James, though it's clear our visitor has already noticed them. After Father stormed off to the lighthouse, James revealed more about his research. He believes certain locations exist where time does not flow uniformly. There are places where the boundaries between different periods grow thin. He calls Greystone a temporal eddy and claims the lighthouse itself may be the focal point of these disturbances. Most shocking of all, he confessed this is why he sought out our island specifically. His expedition was no accident. He was searching for Greystone. The storm and shipwreck were unforeseen, but his presence here is not coincidence. I should distrust him, perhaps even fear him and his strange theories. Instead, I find myself drawn to him more with each passing day. He treats me as an equal, values my observations, and sees in me something more than just a lighthouse keeper's daughter. Tonight, I noticed 6 coins among his salvaged possessions, bearing dates that span from 1879 to 1890, 5 years into our future. When I showed them to him, he simply nodded as if they confirmed some private theory. For the first time, I wonder if the mother I never knew might somehow be connected to these temporal mysteries. Father's resistance to discussion, his agitation when the anomalies occur, and his immediate distrust of James all suggest he knows more than he admits. May 20th, 1885. James grows stronger and more handsome daily. I catch myself watching his hands as he writes in his journal. He has elegant, educated hands with neatly trimmed nails, so unlike Father's or mine. His voice also captivates me, with its refined accent, precise vocabulary, and the way he makes ordinary words sound like poetry. This morning, I found him examining the lighthouse mechanism during my regular maintenance. Despite Father's prohibition, James asked detailed questions about when it was installed, how it operates, and whether parts have ever been replaced. His interest seemed more than scholarly curiosity. Later, as I changed the bandage on his healing head wound, our faces came close enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. For one dizzying moment, I thought he might, but he only thanked me for my care. Still, something in his eyes made my heart race in a most unfamiliar way. I found a strange instrument among his possessions today. A brass device like a compass, but with additional dials and a crystal at its center that seems to glow faintly in darkness. When I asked its purpose, he called it a chronometric compass, designed to detect temporal fluctuations. According to his measurements, the anomalies are growing stronger and more frequent. Father caught us examining it together and became so enraged he had to walk to the far end of the island to compose himself. His reaction only strengthens my suspicion that he knows far more about Greystone's mysteries than he has ever shared with me. Tonight, as James and I watched the sunset from the cottage porch, time seemed to slow. The sun hung low on the horizon for what felt like hours, its golden light bathing us in a moment that stretched beyond natural limits. Neither of us spoke of it, but our shared glance acknowledged what we both felt, that in this strange pocket of disturbed time, something is growing between us that defies conventional understanding. Like Greystone itself, we stand between worlds, between times. And like the lighthouse beam cutting through darkness, James Hartford illuminates mysteries I've lived alongside but never truly seen. May 23rd, 1885. Greystone Island. Something is happening to time itself on Greystone. I can no longer dismiss the anomalies as isolated incidents or tricks of perception. This morning, I witnessed the sun rise in the east, set merely 3 hours later in the north, then rise again from the west. The compass in Father's navigation room spun wildly throughout, its needle unable to find true north as the heavens themselves rearranged. James observed it all with me, meticulously recording the phenomena in his journal. His hand never trembled, his eyes alight with the fervor of a man seeing confirmation of long-held theories. When the skies finally settled into normal patterns, he revealed the true purpose of his voyage to Greystone, not as a maritime historian, but as a researcher of temporal anomalies. For years, he has tracked reports of chronological disturbances around the world, ships arriving at port before they departed, islands where seasons pass at different rates than the mainland, and compasses that point to when rather than where. All his research pointed to Greystone as a nexus of these disturbances. The Stella Maris was chartered specifically to bring him here. What terrifies and thrills me in equal measure is how readily I believe him. The evidence surrounds us daily in ways I've normalized my entire life, never knowing the world doesn't typically experience time as we do on Greystone. Father remains locked in the lighthouse tower, refusing to acknowledge what's happening. His fear is becoming palpable. May 25, 1885, written during same day as May 23rd. The date above may be meaningless. By my calculations, 2 days should have passed since my last entry, yet the calendar and Father's logbook still read May 23rd. The tides have cycled through their patterns 3 times in what should have been a single day. The moon has shown all its phases in the space of hours. James has fashioned monitoring stations around the island. He has simple devices of his own invention that measure temporal flow using pendulums, light exposure on treated paper, and melting ice. We spent the morning placing these instruments at the northern cliff, the western cove, the southern jetty, and the eastern meadow, with a control station in the cottage. The results defy comprehension. Time moves differently in each location. The northern cliff experiences time at approximately half the rate of the southern jetty, while the eastern meadow occasionally stops altogether, ice neither melting nor growing colder, pendulums suspended mid-swing, and most significant of all, the temporal distortions intensify in perfect concentric circles around the lighthouse itself. James believes the lighthouse isn't merely situated on a temporal disturbance, it somehow generates or anchors it. When I asked why he seemed unsurprised by these findings, his answer chilled me. Because I've seen this pattern before. May 27th, 1885? Father collapsed this afternoon after the most violent temporal shift yet. One moment, we were experiencing a calm spring morning. The next, winter gales battered the island, snow accumulating in drifts before suddenly melting away as summer heat scorched the ground. Seasons cycled in minutes. The air vibrated with a sound like glass breaking, though nothing visible shattered. I found Father unconscious at the base of the lighthouse stairs. James helped me carry him to his bed, where he now rests. In his feverish state, he spoke of Mother for the first time in my memory, but not as someone who died, but as someone who vanished. She stepped between moments, he murmured. Margaret walked from one time into another. I stared at him in shock as I tried to understand his words. My mother didn't die in childbirth, as I've always been told. She disappeared in a temporal event. When Father awakened, he found James and me poring over the lighthouse construction plans. His rage was terrible. He scattered papers in the air and physically pushed James from the room despite his still healing injuries. Then Father turned to me with eyes wild with fear, grasping my shoulders with bruising intensity. He made me swear never to enter the lighthouse during what he calls the bleeding hours. What are the bleeding hours? I dared ask. Sunset and sunrise, when the boundary between times grows thinnest. He yelled the words before turning away. Too late. I realize he's been protecting me from my mother's fate all these years, his gruff demeanor masking terror that I too might step between moments and be lost forever. If only he had trusted me with the truth. Date unknown. I was afraid that James would find a way to leave the island after Father's anger, but he seemed more concerned about what was causing it. The stars are wrong tonight. James and I climbed to the highest point on Greystone's northern cliff to observe the heavens, bringing his astronomical charts. Not a single constellation matches its proper position. Some stars pulse with colors, blues, reds, and whites. They changed brightness in rhythmic patterns I've never witnessed before. Most disturbing of all, we observed stars that, according to James, haven't occupied northern skies for over 10,000 years, alongside configurations that astronomical projections predict for centuries in our future. We are viewing the night sky from multiple eras simultaneously. James took careful measurements with his sextant, comparing the star positions to his charts. From these calculations, he estimates we are experiencing temporal bleeding from at least 6 different time periods, all converging on Greystone like streams flowing into a whirlpool. As we worked, huddled close against the night's chill, I became acutely aware of his proximity. Our hands brushed as we passed instruments back and forth. When he pointed out a particular stellar abnormality, his breath warmed my cheek. These small intimacies affected me more profoundly than the cosmic impossibilities above us. For a moment, time seemed to stop entirely, not as a scientific phenomenon, but as a personal one. The universe narrowed to just us, 2 souls confronting infinity together. Perhaps June 1885. We have converted the kitchen into a research laboratory. Every flat surface holds James' instruments, our notebooks, and makeshift experimental apparatus. Father refuses to enter, taking his meals in the lighthouse or on the jetty. James has taught me proper scientific methodology, such as how to form hypotheses, design experiments with controls, record data objectively, and draw conclusions only from evidence. Under different circumstances, I imagine this is how university students learn, though I doubt many female scholars enjoy such one-on-one instruction, especially from such a handsome man. Together, we've documented 43 distinct temporal anomalies in the past several days. The most consistent pattern emerges around the lighthouse itself, where time moves in clockwise spirals. It accelerates as one approaches the structure, then dramatically slows inside the tower. Within the lantern room, at the very top, minutes can stretch into hours, while seconds race past outside. Most remarkably, we've discovered that the Fresnel lens does more than focus light. It somehow focuses time. When the beam is active, temporal distortion intensifies across the island. When we briefly deactivated the light, against Father's vehement objections, the anomalies momentarily stabilized. James believes the original lighthouse builders may have known something of these properties. Certain architectural elements, such as the precise height of the tower, the unusual composition of the foundation stones, and the specific focal length of the lens, appear deliberately calculated to enhance rather than minimize the temporal effects. But who would build such a thing, and why? And what does my mother's disappearance reveal about the true purpose of Greystone light? Unknown date. The blood on these pages is mine, from a cut sustained during the most violent temporal event yet. The entire island shuddered as if struck by an earthquake. Glasses shattered, furniture toppled, and the lighthouse beam visibly bent, curving through the air in impossible arcs. James and I were in the lantern room, examining the lens mechanism when it happened. The immense prisms began to rotate of their own accord, despite the drive mechanism being disengaged. Colors separated from the light itself. Rainbows detached from the beam to float independently through the air like luminous serpents. More frightening still, as I reached out to steady myself against the railing, my hand passed through it as if through smoke. For several terrifying seconds, I could see through my own flesh to the bones beneath, my body becoming translucent. James experienced the same effect. I could see the wall behind him through his fading form. We called to each other, but our voices emerged slowly and deepened, as if speaking underwater. Then, most terrifying of all, James vanished completely for nearly a minute, though I could still feel his hand gripping mine. When he reappeared, his clothing was different. Older, more weathered versions of the same garments before returning to normal. We fled the tower, but not before I saw something impossible reflected in the lens. A woman's face, so similar to my own that it could only be my mother. She seemed to be looking at me from within the glass itself, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. Father found us collapsed on the stairs, James holding me as blood streamed from a gash on my forehead where I'd struck the railing during our escape. For once, Father didn't separate us or demand James keep his distance. Instead, he helped us to the cottage, his face ashen with recognition of what had occurred. "It's beginning again," he whispered to himself. June? July? 1885? Time has lost all meaning for us now. Clocks run backward or not at all. The sun rises and sets at irregular intervals. We've taken to measuring days by lighthouse watch rotations rather than traditional hours. Father has finally abandoned his pretense, accepting that we must combine our knowledge to understand what's happening. This afternoon, or what passed for afternoon during a day that has lasted approximately 37 hours so far, he unlocked a sea chest I've never been permitted to open. Inside the chest was Mother's journals and research papers. She wasn't just my father's wife. She was a physicist specializing in theoretical temporal mechanics. Her notes are decades ahead of current scientific understanding. Some pages contain formulas and concepts James says weren't discovered until years after her supposed death. Most shocking of all, among her papers is a photograph dated 1920. My mother came from the future. James wasn't surprised by this revelation. In fact, he admitted he's known about Margaret Thornfield's theoretical work since his university days. Her disappearance from historical record after publishing groundbreaking papers on temporal elasticity was what first led him to investigate cases of time displacement. He never expected her husband and daughter would still be maintaining the lighthouse she used for her experiments. This explains Father's overprotectiveness, his distrust of James, and his obsession with maintaining the lighthouse exactly as it has always been. He wasn't just preserving a navigational aid, he was keeping open a doorway through which my mother might someday return. As this knowledge settled between us, I looked at James with new understanding. He didn't come to Greystone merely to study temporal anomalies. He came looking for Margaret Thornfield, the woman who first theorized their existence. The question haunting me now is this: did my mother leave voluntarily, or was she lost accidentally? And if she possessed the knowledge to travel through time deliberately, why hasn't she returned to us? Unless, the thought chills my blood, she tried and found herself unable to reach the correct moment. Perhaps she's out there still, in some distant future or past, searching for the husband and daughter she left behind on an island outside of time. Tonight, as James and I reviewed Mother's calculations by lamplight, our hands touched across the weathered pages. In that moment, I felt a connection transcending the conventional boundaries of time, as if we'd known each other across multiple lifetimes. If Mother could step between moments, perhaps others can too. Perhaps the lighthouse doesn't merely observe the breakdown of temporal boundaries, but enables passage through them. Tomorrow, we will attempt something dangerous. We will enter the lantern room during sunset, when the temporal bleeding is strongest, to test her theories. Father protested at first, but his determination to reclaim his wife eventually overcame his fear of losing his daughter. If these words abruptly end, know that I stepped willingly into the unknown, seeking truth even at the cost of my place in time. June 12, 1885, I think, Greystone Island. I press sea lavender between these pages to mark this day, though I cannot be certain of the date anymore. Time continues to slip and slide around us like the tide over wet sand, leaving impressions before washing them away again. What remains constant amid this temporal chaos are my feelings for James, which have grown with a certainty that frightens me. This morning, as we catalogued Mother's research materials, our hands touched over a page of calculations. The simple contact sent a current through me more powerful than any temporal disturbance. James felt it too. I could see it in the sudden stillness of his posture, the quickening of his breath, and the intensity of his gaze when it met mine. For one heartbeat, then two, we remained frozen in a moment that had nothing to do with Greystone's temporal anomalies and everything to do with the magnetic pull between two souls. I fear these feelings, not because they are unwelcome, but because they are unbearably precious in a world where time itself cannot be trusted. What future can exist for a lighthouse keeper's daughter and a time-displaced scholar? What present, even, when days fracture and reassemble like broken glass? Father watches us with resignation and warning in his eyes. He knows the path we tread. He walked it himself, after all, loving a woman who belonged to another time. June 15th, 1885. Approximate. Today, I witnessed James fade almost to transparency during our morning observations at the northern cliff. One moment he stood beside me, solid and real, making notations in his journal. The next moment, I could see the ocean waves through his increasingly spectral form. Panic seized me. I reached for him without thinking, my hand passing partially through his arm before finding sudden solidity. The contact seemed to anchor him, pulling him firmly back into my time. When he fully materialized again, his clothing had subtly changed. His waistcoat showed different buttons, and his collar was more antiquated in style. According to his pocket watch, he experienced nearly 3 weeks while gone from my sight for mere minutes. I was returning to my own time, he said, when he could speak again, his voice hollow with the implications. Or, perhaps, being pulled to another time entirely. We spent the afternoon conducting experiments with Mother's equations. James believes Greystone exists at the center of what he calls a temporal eddy, a location where multiple timelines intersect and overlap, creating a vortex of chronological instability. The lighthouse doesn't merely mark this phenomenon, it somehow regulates it. Mother's calculations suggest the Fresnel lens acts as a focusing mechanism for temporal energy, while the rotating beam creates a stabilizing rhythm that prevents complete collapse of the intersecting timelines. This explains Father's obsessive maintenance of the light. He hasn't simply been keeping ships safe from Greystone's dangerous shores. He's been maintaining the fragile equilibrium that might someday allow Mother to find her way home. More troubling is James's theory that individuals are naturally drawn back to their original timelines unless they are somehow anchored in their current temporal position. Like objects in the tide, we eventually wash back to our shores of origin. For James, that would mean returning to 1883. For my mother, it should have meant returning to 1920. That she hasn't suggests something prevents her return, or that she no longer wishes to come back. June 18, 1885, possibly. I found Mother's personal diary today, separate from her research journals. Father had hidden it beneath a loose floorboard in the lighthouse storeroom. I cannot bring myself to feel guilty for reading it. She is half of me, this woman I never knew, this time traveler who gave me life before disappearing into history or future or whatever lies beyond Greystone's temporal boundaries. Her story is more extraordinary than I imagined. Margaret Ellington was born in 1896, grew up in Boston, and became a physicist at a time when women rarely entered scientific fields. In 1920, at age 24, she traveled to Greystone to investigate rumors of navigational anomalies and unexplained time discrepancies reported by passing ships. She never intended to stay, never intended to fall in love with the young lighthouse keeper who helped with her research, never intended to become trapped when her research vessel departed without her during a temporal disturbance. Her diary entries span 3 years on Greystone, her initial desperation to return to her time, her gradual acceptance, her blossoming love for my father, and finally, her joy at my birth. The final entries hint at a discovery, a method to potentially control the temporal anomalies rather than merely observe them. The lighthouse is not just a marker of the temporal eddy, she wrote. It is a key that can lock or unlock doors between times. T doesn't understand yet what we've built together. Our child might be the first natural citizen of this new understanding of time, belonging neither wholly to my era nor to his, but to the liminal space between. The diary ends abruptly after this entry. Whatever discovery she made, whatever attempt she made to implement it, it resulted in her disappearance when I was barely 6 months old. I brought the diary to James, watching emotions play across his face as he read. I saw academic excitement at her theories, personal empathy for her situation, so similar to his own, and something deeper when he looked up at me, something that made my heart race. "You have her eyes," he said softly, "and her brilliance." June 22nd, 1885. Time stopped today. Not in the metaphorical sense that poets use, but literally. The waves froze mid-crash against the rocks. Seabirds hung suspended in the air. Even the lighthouse beam halted, a solid line of light extending from the tower to the horizon. James and I had climbed to the highest point on Greystone's eastern cliffs to test Mother's theory about temporal fluctuation patterns. One moment we were setting up instruments, the next the world around us crystallized into perfect stillness. Only we remained able to move, to breathe, and to think within this frozen moment. The silence was absolute. There was no wind, no waves, and no distant cry of gulls. Just our breathing and the thundering of my heart. We stood at the edge of the cliff, surrounded by a painting of reality, and I have never felt so alive nor so terrified. James turned to me, his eyes wide with wonder and scientific fascination. He spoke my name, the sound oddly flat in the timeless air, and reached for my hand. Our fingers intertwined. His other hand rose to my cheek, barely making contact, as if I might be as fragile as the frozen moment surrounding us. "If this is all the time we have," he whispered, "then let us make it eternal." When his lips met mine, warmth flooded through me in a rush of sensation that defied the stopped world around us. I felt myself respond with a hunger that startled me. My hands were in his hair, pulling him closer, and our bodies pressing together as if trying to occupy the same point in space and time. The kiss intensified, and with it came a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to my eyes. As suddenly as it had stopped, time crashed back into motion. Waves broke against rocks with explosive force. Wind nearly knocked us from our feet. Birds screamed overhead, startled by our sudden appearance in their territory. The instruments we'd brought shattered against the ground, as if the resumption of time carried physical force. But we remained standing, clinging to each other, unwilling to break this connection that had transcended time itself. June 24th, 1885. Our days have found a strange new rhythm. Mornings are devoted to scientific observation and experimentation. James teaches me proper methodology while I show him my lifetime of practical observations about Greystone's peculiarities. In the afternoons, we comb through Mother's research, connecting her theoretical frameworks with our empirical findings. The evenings belong to us alone, precious hours stolen from the chaos of unstable time. James tells me of his Boston. It sounds so different from the city Mother described in her diary, though separated by less than 40 years. He speaks of cobblestone streets and gaslit theaters, and of university debates and scientific exhibitions. I share with him the secrets of Greystone, such as the hidden cove where abalone grow larger than dinner plates, the sea cave that amplifies distant whale songs to audible levels, and the precise pattern of stars that heralds seasonal shifts in the lighthouse. With each exchange, the attraction between us deepens. Every brush of hands, every shared glance, and every moment our bodies align as we work side by side intensifies the current running between us. Since our kiss on the cliff, we have been more careful. Father's watchful presence is a reminder of consequences. But in the evening hours, when Father takes the lighthouse watch, we find moments of intimacy that burn brighter than the great light itself. James is fading more frequently now, momentary transparencies that strike without warning. Each episode leaves him disoriented, reporting glimpses of Boston streets or university halls. I find myself reaching for him constantly, my touch serving as anchor to this time, this place. What began as scholarly partnership has transformed into something far more vital. I am falling in love with a man who belongs to another time, just as my mother did before me. The cruel symmetry of it would be almost poetic if it didn't threaten to tear my heart to pieces. June 27th, 1885. We found a devastating discovery today. As James and I combined Mother's theoretical calculations with our empirical observations, a terrible truth emerged. Someone must maintain the lighthouse. Someone must keep its light turning in precise, unbroken rhythm, or the temporal eddy surrounding Greystone could collapse entirely. The implications are staggering. If the eddy collapses, all times currently intersecting here would violently separate. Those not belonging to Greystone's original timeline, James certainly, possibly even me with my half-future parentage, would be flung back to our times of origin. Even worse, the separation could create a temporal backwash that might damage the fabric of time itself, causing ripples of distortion far beyond our small island. Father has known this all along. It explains his fanatical dedication to lighthouse maintenance, his resistance to renovation or modernization, and his fear when James and I began experimenting. He has been holding together fragments of broken time through sheer stubborn routine for 18 years, hoping that keeping the rhythm perfect might someday allow Mother to find her way back across the boundaries she crossed. James and I sat with this knowledge as sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, purples and greens that belong to no natural spectrum. His hand found mine, and neither of us spoke the obvious conclusion. He cannot stay, and I cannot leave. One of us must remain to maintain the lighthouse, to keep the temporal eddy stable, to prevent catastrophic chronological collapse. The cruelty of it stopped my breath. To find love across the boundaries of time, only to learn that same boundary must forever separate us. Unless Mother was right. Unless the lighthouse isn't merely maintaining the temporal eddy, but could be used to control it, to open doors between times at will, and to allow passage back and forth without disruption. As if sensing my thoughts, James pressed Mother's journal into my hands, open to one of her final entries. The lens is not just a lens. The light is not just a light. What they built here, knowingly or not, is a doorway. And with the right key, any door can be unlocked. July 4th, 1885. Independence Day, though it holds little meaning on our isolated island, still, James surprised me with a tiny celebration. He crafted a miniature flag from scraps and prepared a special meal while I conducted observations. We even attempted at a traditional dance in our small kitchen. His efforts to create normalcy amid our extraordinary circumstances touched me deeply. We have dedicated ourselves to understanding Mother's final discovery, which is the mechanism by which the lighthouse might be transformed from a passive maintainer of the temporal eddy to active gateway between times. Her notes contain tantalizingly incomplete formulas and diagrams suggesting modifications to the Fresnel lens. James has begun to fade with increasing frequency. Twice today I found myself grasping at empty air where he had stood moments before, only to have him reappear minutes later, disoriented and speaking of places I've never seen. Each episode leaves him weakened, as if the effort of returning to my time drains his physical strength. Last night, in the shadows of the Lighthouse storeroom where we've established our makeshift laboratory, he pulled me to him with unexpected urgency. His kisses held desperation, his hands mapping my face as if committing it to memory. When we separated, breathless and trembling, I saw fear in his eyes for the first time. It was not scholarly concern about temporal mechanics, but the raw human terror of losing someone beloved. "I don't want to go back," he whispered against my hair. "My life, my work, everything I value is here now." I held him as tightly as I could, as if physical strength alone could preserve him in my time. Outside the window, the lighthouse beam swept its perpetual circle, keeping ships safe, keeping time stable, and keeping James with me for a little while longer. Father found us there, entwined in each other's arms. Instead of anger, his weathered face showed only resignation and understanding. He knows better than anyone the price of loving someone from another time. Without a word, he pressed a small object into my hand before leaving us alone once more. It was the brass key with strange teeth that we found among James's possessions after the shipwreck. The key that, according to Mother's final notes, might unlock the doorway between times. July 10th, 1885. Greystone Island. Father collapsed today while oiling the lighthouse mechanism. I found him crumpled at the base of the spiral stairs, his breathing shallow and his skin ashen. James helped me carry him to his bed, where he now rests, his weathered hands trembling even in sleep. Dr. Harrison won't arrive for another fortnight with the supply boat, and I fear what condition Father might be in by then. His collapse has forced the conversation we've been avoiding. Someone must maintain the lighthouse, not merely for the safety of passing ships, but to preserve the temporal stability of Greystone itself. With each passing day, James fades more frequently, sometimes disappearing entirely for hours before returning disoriented and exhausted. The temporal eddy grows more unstable, with objects jumping decades in apparent age, rooms in the cottage experiencing different seasons simultaneously, and the lighthouse beam occasionally splitting into multiple trajectories across different timelines. Tonight, as Father slept, James and I pored over Mother's final calculations by lamplight. Her theory was correct. The lighthouse isn't merely maintaining the temporal eddy, but could, with precise adjustments, be used to control it, to open doorways between specific points in time, and to determine who passes through and who remains behind. The brass key found among James's possession after the shipwreck is indeed a key, but not to any conventional lock. According to Mother's diagrams, it fits into a hidden mechanism within the Fresnel lens assembly, allowing for precise calibration of the temporal field. With it, we could theoretically direct the lighthouse beam to connect with any point in time where Greystone Lighthouse existed, from its construction in 1823 to whatever distant future awaits it. As this understanding dawned, James took my hands in his. The depth of emotion in his eyes stole my breath. He believes we could use this mechanism to send me forward in time, to experience the modern world of my mother's era or beyond, while he remains behind to maintain the lighthouse. His self-sacrifice shatters my heart, even as it confirms what I already knew of his character. But I cannot leave, any more than Father could all these years. Greystone is my home, my responsibility, and my inheritance. It is where Mother might someday return, if she still searches for a way back to us. James kissed me then, with a tenderness that spoke of farewell already beginning to form in his mind. July 15th, 1885. Father's health continues to decline. He drifts in and out of coherence, sometimes mistaking me for Mother, sometimes lucidly discussing complex aspects of lighthouse maintenance, as if determined to pass on every fragment of knowledge before it's too late. The burden of what approaches weighs on me, not just the prospect of losing him, but the knowledge that I will soon become Greystone's sole guardian, the only remaining Thornfield to maintain the fragile equilibrium of intersecting times. James and I have made a dangerous decision. Before committing ourselves to our separate fates, him potentially returning to his own time, me remaining as lighthouse keeper, we will attempt a controlled excursion through time. A test to see if Mother's mechanisms can be mastered, if passages can be made safely in both directions. We have selected our destination, Boston, July 17, 1883. Just days before James departed on his fateful voyage to Greystone. If successful, we'll experience his world briefly, then return to Greystone within hours of our departure. The experiment will prove whether controlled passage is possible, whether the lighthouse can indeed become a doorway rather than merely a marker of temporal disturbance. Tonight, we prepared the necessary adjustments to the Fresnel lens, following Mother's detailed specifications. The work was delicate, requiring 4 hands working in perfect coordination. James applied his theoretical knowledge, and I contributed my lifetime of practical experience with the mechanism. As we worked, side by side in the lantern room, our bodies frequently brushing, I found myself memorizing him. The precise furrow that forms between his brows when concentrating, the graceful efficiency of his scholarly hands now hardened by weeks of island work, and the way the lighthouse beam illuminates half his face on each rotation, as if he exists in alternating worlds. Father knows what we are planning, though he hasn't the strength to argue. When I sat with him this evening, he merely pressed my hand and whispered, "Find your own path through time, Eliza. Don't let my choices determine yours." I leave this journal here, as we cannot risk taking objects from one time to another. If we do not return, let these words stand as testimony to what we attempted, and to the tangle of heart and duty that brought us to this decision. July 18th, 1885, written in different ink, handwriting slightly altered. We have returned. The experiment succeeded beyond all expectations, though nothing could have prepared me for the overwhelming reality of Boston in 1883. We materialized on Castle Island, the beam of Greystone's lighthouse apparently connecting with the small light station there. For a disorienting moment, we clung to each other in the pre-dawn darkness, unable to believe we'd actually accomplished what no human beings had ever consciously done before. We stepped from one time into another. Boston Harbor sprawled before us, crowded with ships I'd only read about in books. There were steam-powered vessels alongside traditional sailing ships, all bristling with activity, even in the early morning hours. The water itself looked different. It was darker, more polluted than the pristine seas around Greystone, yet thrumming with human industry and commerce. James led me through streets growing increasingly busy as dawn brightened the sky. I cannot adequately describe my astonishment at every sight. The buildings were taller than any I'd imagined, streets packed with horses and carriages, and windows displaying goods from around the world. And people, so many people, more than I'd seen in my entire lifetime combined. They all hurried about their morning business. The noise alone nearly overwhelmed me. Hooves on cobblestones, merchants calling out wares, foreign languages mixing with accented English, and machinery clanking and hissing from factories. The smell of the city assaulted my senses, a complex mixture of coal smoke, horses, countless cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and the brackish harbor. After Greystone's clean sea air, I found myself frequently breathless, though excitement rather than discomfort drove my racing pulse. James brought me to a small cafe near the university, ordering coffee and pastries that seemed impossibly refined to my island-raised palate. We sat at a small table, his eyes never leaving my face as I experienced each new sensation. He delighted in my wonder, explaining cultural references I didn't understand, pointing out technological innovations I'd never seen, watching me absorb his world with the pride of someone sharing a beloved home. Later, he took me to the university library. It was an experience that moved me to tears. Never had I imagined so many books gathered in one place, knowledge stretching from floor to ceiling in every direction. James led me to the science collection, where, incredibly, we found one of Mother's published papers from her future. The contradiction of holding a book that wouldn't be written for another decade sent visible ripples through the air around us, reminding us of the precarious nature of our temporal excursion. As dusk approached, we made our way to Boston Harbor, where we found a secluded spot to await the exact time of our planned return. The hours had passed too quickly, filled with wonders I could spend a lifetime recording. Yet beneath the excitement ran an undercurrent of realization. This vibrant, overwhelming world was James's home, the place he had devoted his life to understanding the mysteries of time, the society that had shaped his scholarly mind and refined manners. How could I ever ask him to abandon this for Greystone's isolation? As we stood facing each other in the gathering darkness, the appointed hour approaching, I saw the conflict in his eyes. It was the same war between duty and desire that raged in my own heart. He had shown me his world, presented it like a gift, yet I could sense his reluctance to return to it permanently, to leave behind what we had discovered together on Greystone. The temporal pull began precisely on schedule, the air shimmering around us as Boston's solid reality beginning to fade as Greystone's lighthouse beam found us across time and space. James held me tightly as we transitioned, our molecules realigning to our original time. The sensation defies description, a stretching, falling, flying feeling, as if every part of one's being is unmade and remade in an instant. We materialized in the lantern room, exactly where we had departed just hours before. By the cottage clock, less than 5 hours had passed in Greystone time, though we had spent nearly 14 hours in Boston. Our elation at the successful experiment crashed into horror within moments of our return. Father's bed was empty. We found him in the lighthouse, crumpled at the base of the lens assembly. The logbook lay open beside him, his final entry interrupted mid-word. He had dragged himself from his sickbed to maintain the light in our absence, understanding perhaps better than we did that the lighthouse could not remain unmanned, even briefly, without consequence. My father, Thomas Thornfield, died maintaining the duty that had defined his life. He kept the light that might someday return his beloved Margaret to him, preserving the temporal balance that had claimed half his heart decades before. We buried him at dawn on the eastern point of Greystone, where the sun's first light touches the island each day. July 21st, 1885. Father's passing has revealed a truth we had not fully understood. For 3 days, despite our most precise adjustments, the temporal anomalies have grown increasingly severe. This morning, a flock of passenger pigeons, extinct for decades according to James, darkened the sky above Greystone. This afternoon, the Western Cove briefly transformed into a primeval landscape where creatures from Earth's distant past roamed a shoreline we no longer recognized. James has been constantly fading, sometimes disappearing for hours before returning exhausted and diminished. Last night, as we huddled in the lighthouse while temporal storms lashed the island, realization dawned to us both. It is not merely that someone must maintain the lighthouse, it requires a Thornfield. Mother's final calculations, which we had interpreted as theoretical, were actually literal. The bloodline that has maintained Greystone for generations carries a genetic marker, a biological affinity for this specific temporal vortex. In scientific terms that James attempted to explain, my family's DNA has become quantum entangled with Greystone's unique chronological position. Only someone carrying this marker can fully stabilize the intersecting timelines. James cannot stay alone to maintain the lighthouse. He would be eventually pulled back to his own time, and Greystone's temporal eddy would collapse catastrophically without a Thornfield presence. I cannot leave, not if we wish to preserve the stable pocket of intersecting times that Greystone represents. My blood, my very cells, are what anchor this phenomenon to stable reality. We face an impossible choice, made more agonizing by the deepening bond between us. Each hour of Father's memorial preparations, each moment of shared grief and scientific discovery, each silent communication of eyes meeting across a room has woven our hearts more tightly together. The prospect of eternal separation has become unthinkable, yet the alternatives seem equally impossible. July 25th, 1885. An unexpected discovery in Father's personal chest. It was a letter from Mother, dated 3 years after her disappearance from Greystone. Somehow, she found a way to send a message across time, though not to return physically herself. In it, she explains what we have already begun to understand, the Thornfield connection to Greystone's temporal nature. She also reveals that she has found herself in 1945, unable to fully control her destination when attempting to return to us. Most importantly, she outlines a modification to the lighthouse mechanism that would allow more precise control of temporal transitions. It is not enough to guarantee a specific date, but to ensure that two people traveling together would remain together, bound to the same temporal destination. James and I spent today implementing these modifications, our work punctuated by moments of desperate tenderness, kisses that taste of salt and fear, embraces that seek to memorize the contours of each other's bodies, glances that speak what words cannot encompass. Tonight, as the modified lighthouse beam swept its arc across the darkened sea, James made his decision. Not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with quiet certainty that brought me to my knees. He will stay with me on Greystone. August 1st, 1885. 1 week since James chose to remain. 1 week of adjusting to a new reality where the word future no longer means separation, but shared possibility. The lighthouse continues its eternal vigil, now maintained by 2 pairs of hands working in harmony. The temporal disturbances have stabilized, though they have not disappeared entirely. Greystone remains a place where time behaves by its own rules. Tonight, we stood on the eastern cliff, watching the stars emerge in their proper positions for the first time in months. James held me from behind, his arms encircling my waist, his chin resting on my head. We fit together as if designed by time itself for this precise configuration. I was always meant to be shipwrecked here, he murmured against my hair. All my research, all my theories, they were just the path leading me to you. I turned in his arms, facing the man who had given up his world to share mine. The lighthouse beam swept over us, momentarily bathing us in its light before continuing its perpetual journey. In that brief illumination, I saw our future written in his eyes. Seasons turning, years accumulating, knowledge deepening, and love growing ever more rooted in the strange soil of our temporal island. Later, in our bed, no longer mine alone but ours, I watched James sleep beside me, his scholarly face softened in repose. My heart expanded with a joy almost too large to contain. I had expected duty to claim my life and lighthouse keeping to be my sole legacy. Instead, I have found a partnership that transcends time itself. We will still maintain Mother's research and still hope that someday we might master the temporal gateway enough to find her in that distant 1945. We will still work to understand the true nature of Greystone's position in the cosmos. But these scientific pursuits no longer carry the desperate edge of survival or separation. They have become a shared adventure, one thread in the complex tapestry of a life we are weaving together. Outside, the lighthouse beam continues its eternal sweep, a constant in a world of temporal flux. Inside, I curl against the warmth of James's sleeping form, marveling at how the heart can find its home across impossible boundaries of time and circumstance. I am Eliza Thornfield, daughter of a lighthouse keeper, keeper of the light myself, guardian of a temporal gateway, and beloved of a man who crossed time to find me. Whatever storms approach, whatever mysteries the lighthouse still holds, whatever years stretch before us on our island outside of time, we will face them together, our love the most constant force in an inconstant universe. The remaining page contains a pressed flower of sea lavender and a sketch of the lighthouse beam splitting into a prism of different timelines, all converging at a single point.